Fearful of stepping on his time. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for our distinguished keynote speaker, Ashwin Sanghi. All yours, sir. All yours.
That was a perfect introduction. Thank you. Sumita Mishra ji and Kabir Bedi ji, Ramesh Vinayak ji, and of course the entire team of Literati, including dear Jaskiran and Afan ji. I am delighted to be here in Chandigarh for Literati 2023. I just realized, and I was telling Sumita ji outside, that I first attended Chandigarh Literati in 2013. And now here we are in 2023, 10 years later. How time flies, and how this festival has entrenched itself in the hearts and minds of so many. So let me start with today's keynote. You know, it is said that a good speech should have a good beginning and a good ending, and they should be as close together as possible. So I will try and keep myself within the discipline of a time limit. You know, they say that one worships 3 Devis or Devtas in one's life. The first is one's Ishta Devta, the deity who resides in your heart. The second is one's Kul Devta, the family's deity. And the third is one's Gram Devta, the god of the village or the town. Now, being born in Mumbai meant that my Gram Devta would necessarily be Siddhi Vinayak or Ganpati, the supreme remover of obstacles. And I grew up in a house where I observed my father reciting the Hanuman Chalisa daily. This meant that my Kul Devta would automatically be Bajrangbali. But the deity most frequently in my prayers is not an Ishta Devta, but an Ishta Devi. She is called by various names: Shakti, Saraswati, Lakshmi, Kali, Bhavani, Savitri, Sati, Mahabala, and hundreds of others. But here in your fantastic city, she is called Chandi, hence the name Chandigarh. I am so honored to speak here in the very fortress of Chandi. Devi ji is the ultimate source of power. If your objective is wealth, prosperity, beauty, purity, and well-being, then Lakshmi is at hand for you. If knowledge, wisdom, learning, science, music, art, poetry, culture, or literature is your thing, then Saraswati. And if it is power or overcoming negativity or the banishing of ignorance, then Kali is the one you need. Today I bow my head to every manifestation of Ma Shakti and thank her for every word she has inspired me to write thus far. I think when I think back on this topic of today, the dharma of a writer, I think one of the dharmas and one of the most important is to remember that every word and every sentence on every page of every book is never yours. You are simply the medium that puts ink on paper. When I started out as a storyteller in 2007, I had absolutely no idea that I would stand here before you today, having written 15 books, a little over 1 million words, with over 2 million books sold. Thank you. I have no training in creative writing, no degree in literature, no pedigree in the writing world. I only knew one thing, that the shortest distance between two people is a story. Think for a moment, what would be the significance of Ayodhya without the Ramayana? How would we understand karma or dharma without the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita? How would we know ancient Greek democracy without the Iliad or the Odyssey? How would we understand the history of Makkah without the Quran? And what is Jerusalem without the Bible? How would you comprehend Patliputra without the Arthashastra? And what would be Baghdad without the 1001 Nights? How would we teach the duties of kingship without the Panchatantra? It is said that the job of a storyteller is to make old things sound new and to make new things sound familiar. I do that to the best of my ability. I am a work in progress, and all that I hope for with each book is to be slightly better than my previous one. That is my dharma, to tell a good story and to keep my reader turning the page. You see, my problem is that I grew up in an environment which was an entirely business-oriented environment. I started work with my dad when I was 15 years old. Now, there are 600,000 words in the English dictionary. But when I used to go to my office, my dad's office, there was a traditional Munimji who wore a black topi and a white dhoti. And he told me that there were only two important words in the world. And those two important words were debit and credit. He said, why are you wasting time reading books? Read a balance sheet. And book reading is not going to get you anywhere. Bookkeeping can. So that was the cultural ethos in which I grew up. What else do you expect in a Marwadi family? And you know, when I was writing a book, Sumita ji, called The Vault of Vishnu, which was a few years ago, I came across a very interesting tradition. In Samarkand, the ancient merchants, they had this wonderful tradition. When a child would be born in their house, they would touch a drop of honey to the tongue of the child, and they would touch a drop of glue to the palm of the child. And the logic for that was that they wanted the child to grow up and to have a tongue as sweet as honey, so that he could sell anything to anyone. And they wanted him to have a sticky palm so that gold coins would not leave his palm. So, in some ways, the context, the cultural context of a Marwadi family is similar to the ancient merchants of Samarkand. So I would go back to my maternal granduncle, who was the one who brought me into the world of reading and my love for literature. He had this wonderful tradition of sending me one book every week to read. During his lifetime, he sent me a little over 350 books. And so I would go back to Nanaji and I would say, see this Munimji, he is saying that you're wasting your time with books. And Nanaji had this wonderful way of being able to explain things. He said, you know, beta, ek cheez yaad rakho, tum to Marwadi ho, tum to Lakshmi ji ki puja karoge. That's part of your DNA. But remember one thing, that the relationship between Lakshmi and Saraswati is very unique. He said, Lakshmi is always worried where Saraswati is. अगर सरस्वती इस कमरे में बैठी है तो लक्ष्मी भी यहाँ पर आ जाएगी, और अगर इस कमरे से लक्ष्मी जी को लगा कि सरस्वती कहीं और जा रही हैं, then she will also follow her. So even if your objective is to go after Lakshmi, the short route is to go after Saraswati. And of course, then Nanaji would take it one step further and he would say that when Lakshmi and Saraswati are able to sit together, then the only deity in the pantheon of gods and goddesses who can sit between them is Ganeshji. And that is why Ganeshji is considered to be the embodiment of Shubhlabh, the embodiment of wealth and wisdom, and which probably explains why Ashwin Sanghi has a figure the way he does. Because I have spent my entire life attempting to sit between Lakshmi and Saraswati. So I started writing the Rosabal line in 2002. I hadn't written anything longer than a couple of pages. A dear friend of mine who was already an accomplished writer, I said, "मैं कैसे लिखूं इसे? How do I go about writing this book?" And she reminded me, she said, "Remember what Somerset Maugham said? There are 3 rules for writing the novel. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are." So then I asked someone else. I said, "Listen, I want to write this fast-paced thriller based on a story set in Kashmir. How do I write a thriller?" And he said that the way to write a thriller is to ask a question in the beginning and answer it by the end. And that's a thriller. So I wrote that book and I started the process of sending it out to literary agents and publishers. And you know, there is this very little interesting story about the great writer Samuel Johnson. Once a young man asked Johnson that, "Sir, I've written a book, would you mind reading it?" And the very courteous Samuel Johnson said, "Sure, send it to me and I'll have a look." And then a few months later, Samuel Johnson sent the young man a letter. And he said, "Your story is good and original, but the part that's good isn't original. And the part that's original isn't too good." So I was wondering, I said, "Mera situation kuch aise hi lag raha hai." That 47 publishers and literary agents, for whatever reason, are not finding any logic or any quality or anything relevant in my writing. So in front of my desk, there was a bulletin board. And on that desk, on that bulletin board, there were 6 numbers, 12, 18, 30, 33, and 38. And people used to come and ask me, "What are these numbers?" And well, 12 was the number of times that the first book in the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling was rejected by publishers. And 18 was the number of times that Jonathan Livingston Seagull was rejected. And 30 was the number of times that the first thriller by Stephen King, Carrie, was rejected. 33 was the number of times that Chicken Soup for the Soul was rejected. And 38 was Gone with the Wind. And of course, yours truly, Ashwin Sanghi, was topping the list with 47. So I used to convince myself that I'm doing so much better than all of these people. So I was feeling a little down on my luck and, because I wasn't getting published. And there was this very dear friend of my father. In fact, he was born and brought up in Chandigarh, but lived in Bombay. And he used to come and on Friday or Saturday, they would sit down together and they would have their evening drinks together. And they used to pour out their love and affection in the size of the drinks that they would pour for one another. And most of you would be aware of what a Patiala peg is, right? I mean, Patiala peg is 3 fingers of whiskey, but the 3 fingers aren't held this way, they are held this way. So they would pour these large Johnny Walker Black Labels for one another. And this gentleman, he said, "Beta, tum bade depressed lag rahe ho. What is the matter?" So I said, Uncle, no one wants to publish me. So he said, remember one thing in life, 99% is about good luck. So I was in a bit of an argumentative mood. So I said, but what about the remaining 1%? That must be hard work, talent, efficiency, networking, resources. So many things go into making something successful. So he picked up his whiskey. There was a little bit remaining. He drained it very quickly. He slammed down the glass and he said, 99% is good luck and 1% is bloody good luck. So I wondered, what is this bloody good luck? But now I can tell you, having gone through 15 or 20 years of this Agni Pariksha in the literary world, you are lucky if you get to do what you love. You are a little luckier if you get to do what you love and you are good at it. And you are bloody lucky if you get to do what you love, you are also good at it, and someone is willing to pay you for it. That is bloody good luck. So there is a book which is known as the Second Neurotics Notebook, published in 1966. In that book, there is a line that has stayed with me all these years. There is something in every atheist itching to believe. And there's something in every believer itching to doubt. And that's me, believing and doubting alternately. But that became the basis for my storytelling. People think that I write historical fiction, mythological thrillers, conspiracy fiction, but honestly, neither history nor myth interest me on their own. I am more concerned with overlaps. Some of you may have heard this from a previous talk of mine, but as a young author, I went to Kolkata to address some students. And in the afternoon, I had some time, so I told the driver, I said, "Mujhe kahin interesting jagah pe le jao." Now, if you are in Calcutta and he says, "Saab, main mandir le jata hu," you take it for granted ki he is taking you to a Devi Ji ka mandir, to a Kali mandir. We went to this temple, but it didn't look like a temple. It was very, very ordinary, whitewashed walls, and must have been around maybe 15 feet by 15 feet in size. In the center of the room, there was one green-colored throne, and there were people who were doing aarti and offering flowers and all of that. But then when I looked closely, I realized that on the green-colored throne, there was actually a portrait of Amitabh Bachchan. And on that throne also, there were a pair of shoes which had been used during the shooting of a movie called Coolie, I think. And I pinched myself. I said, is this real? Is this really happening? Am I in a Amitabh temple? And I came outside of that temple and I was waiting for the car to pick me up. And a young man, a young boy, he came with a basket with all the stuff that could be sold before you went into the mandir, prasad and phool and agarbatti and all of that. But I picked up one thing from him, which was a little booklet. And that little booklet was known as the Amitabh Chalisa. And that is the moment I realized that this story is real. That actually there is this temple and there is a worship going on of this person. And I thought to myself, I said, Ashwin, right now, imagine in case your car comes hurtling towards you and the driver loses control of the brakes and he knocks you down. And you die on the spot. And now you are born 1,000 years later. And now in this new rebirth, someone comes to you and says, you know, we have heard about this myth called Amitabh. Do you think that he could have been a real man? But isn't that the same question we are asking about Ram or Krishna? And that is the point where I suddenly realized that I had found my calling. Because you take those two words, myth and history, and you put them in a particle collider and you bring them charging towards one another at a very high speed, and you now have these two elements fusing together, because myth plus history is equal to mystery. And that's what I do. People think I'm interested in religion. No, I'm interested in philosophy, because philosophy is about questions that can never be answered. Religion is about answers that can never be questioned. And please don't be misled by articles that write about my scholarly work and my research. I'm not a historian, I'm not a theologian, I'm not a scholar. I'm a simple paperback writer. The pop group, the Beatles, in 1966, released a title known as The Paperback Writer. And the lyrics went, "Dear sir or madam, will you read my book? It took me years to write. Will you take a look? It's 1,000 pages, give or take a few. I'll be writing more in a week or two. If you really like it, you can have the rights. It could make 1 million for you overnight." I have never been anything more than that paperback writer. I was that in 2007 starting out, and I'm that today. My DNA has remained unchanged. When I had just published the Rosabal line, a young reporter asked me during the press conference, he said, "You're an MBA in finance, you have a business background. Suddenly one fine day you think that you can write a theological thriller based on the story of Jesus Christ. What is your qualification?" So I said, one thing, during my years growing up, my mother always used to say one thing to me. She would say that I am a bloody good liar. And that's what fiction writers do. We spin yarns. And that's what I continue to do. But the corollary to that, of telling a lie, is that if you must tell a lie, then tell that lie as close to the truth as possible. That's why I do my research, in order to make my fiction sound plausible. In legal terms, I am simply seeking reasonable doubt. Reasonable enough to make the story believable. The other great advantage that I have is that I belong to the tradition and culture of Sanatan Dharma, which is never focused on absolutes. It's a no formula faith, no single book, church, or pope. You can have 33 kotis of gods. Buddha can be made into the 9th avatar of Vishnu. Christ can be incorporated into the facade of a temple. You can have a figurine of Nanak, Sai Baba, Mahavir, or any other individual or great entity in your puja, because ingrained within you is the idea that all paths lead to the same God. Your path could be yantra, tantra, mantra, or none. You could be ritualistic, spiritualistic, tantric, astic, nastic, or simply fantastic. It doesn't matter. You can be Shaivite or Vaishnavite, believe in bhakti or shakti. Your quest may be for artha, moksha, kama, dharma. You may worship a statue, a stone, a cow, a monkey, a sun, moon, river, mountain, fire, or even another human, because God is ingrained in everything. You may call a stone a shivling, and I may call a shivling a stone. You may be vegetarian or omnivore, pray in your home, temple, mountaintop, riverbank, or at a cremation ground. There can be 300 versions of the Ramayana, but one version does not negate the other. The Rig Veda's Anu Bhadra Kritavo Yantu Vishwataha is a verse that searches for noble ideas from all directions. So I am deeply grateful that my Matrabhumi is Bharat, that has such a rich culture, tradition, and history. In India, we were never too concerned about the difference between Itihas and Puran. And there was a reason for that. History could never be narrated without a narrator. And it was impossible to have a narration without a narrator's bias. Napoleon said very famously, he said, history is a myth that people choose to believe. He mockingly asked, what is history but a fable that has been agreed upon? But my favorite definition of history, by the way, is George Santayana, who said that history is a pack of lies about events that never happened, written by people who were never there. An event in 1857 is taught as the Great Rebellion of 1857 or the First War of Indian Independence in India. But it is rarely taught to school children in England. And when it is taught to college kids of England, it is called the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. Now, which version of history should we believe? How is it possible for the narrator's bias to not color the narrative? In George Orwell's book, 1984, he said, he who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. Over the decades, history has been used as political football to control narratives. Each day I am reminded of the man who said, on the left, there is nothing right, and on the right, there is nothing left. History is yesterday's politics, and politics is tomorrow's history. History has used, misused, abused, excused, confused, accused, and most importantly, has been used to propagate a viewpoint through sins of omission and commission. Truth be told, what we actually are now today learning from history is that we rarely learn from history. And that is why I see value in the Indian tradition of storytelling. We are concerned with deeper truths rather than absolutes. It was the paperback writer Tom Clancy who said that the difference between fact and fiction is that fiction has to actually make sense. So unlike history, storytelling is like a 3D movie. 3D movies deceive your brain by bringing flat images into three-dimensional splendor. If you close your left and right eyes sequentially, you will notice that each has a slightly different view of an object. So 3D films are recorded using two lenses placed side by side. Now, if we can do this for movies, why not for our stories? Why can't multiple narratives flourish? After all, we are a country which celebrate 300 versions of the Ramayana. Our original epic, what we now call the Mahabharata, started out as 25,000 verses of the Jaya, morphed into something which was 50,000 verses of the Bharat, and went on to 100,000 verses of the Mahabharata, which means that everyone added their own perspective down the generations. So honestly speaking, it has been said that the history of the hunt always glorifies the hunter because lions do not have their own historians. I'm glad that the lions of India finally have storytellers in order to correct some part of that narrative. And if you ask me, Ashwin, what do you think is your dharma of a storyteller? I'm very clear. I want to achieve 3 E's. The first is I must entertain you. If I can't entertain you, you will not turn the page. Second, that along the way, when you're reading, hopefully you come across some material that you hadn't been exposed to earlier. And that is the moment where you find that some education has also kicked in. And third is that by the time you close that book, you realize that there was an aha moment. Why hadn't I thought of this that way? And that is the moment of enlightenment. So I am looking for those 3 things, and the order is very clear. 70% is to entertain, 20% is to educate, and 10% is to enlighten. And that is the power of a story, the ability to change a perspective. Let me end with a little a little couplet that I am tremendously influenced by. नजर बदलो तो नजारे बदल जाते हैं, सोच बदलो तो सितारे बदल जाते हैं, कश्तियां बदलने की जरूरत नहीं, कश्तियां बदलने की जरूरत नहीं, दिशा बदलो तो किनारे बदल जाते हैं. Today, before I came here, there were several people who came and met me and told me about the impact that my books have had on them. I just want to tell you that even till today, 15 years later, I'm not clear as to why I deserve so much love and affection from all of you. I'm very, very grateful, very, very thankful to Ma Shakti for having brought me here amongst you. I wish that you have a wonderful festival. My good wishes to each one of you, and I look forward to interacting with you. All the very best. ज़्यादा टाइम तो नहीं लिया?
बिल्कुल नहीं, बिल्कुल नहीं. Well, just some things that an MC has to do.